Jack Donnelly stood at the fence line of what used to be his father's ranch, wind cutting across the Wyoming grassland like it always had. 15 years he'd been gone. 15 years of cattle drives, bunkhouses, and saving every dollar until he finally had enough to buy the place back from the bank that foreclosed after his father died. The ranch house looked smaller than he remembered, weathered but standing. The barn needed work. The corrals were intact. It was home, or what passed for home in a life spent mostly in saddles and dust. Movement caught his eye, someone riding toward him from the neighboring property. Jack squinted against the afternoon sun and felt his stomach drop. It was Thomas Parker, his father's closest neighbor, riding the same gray gelding he'd always ridden. But that was impossible. The horse would be dead by now, and Thomas Parker should be in his 60s. The man who approached looked maybe 45, same as Jack remembered from childhood. "Jack Donnelly," the man said, smiling warmly. "Heard you were coming back. Good to see you, son." The voice was right, that same deep rumble Thomas Parker had always had. Jack stared. "Mr. Parker?" His voice came out uncertain. "Been a long time. You've grown up considerable." Thomas, or whoever this was, extended his hand. Jack shook it automatically, his mind racing. "Your father would be proud you're buying the place back. I tried to purchase it myself when the bank took it. Thought I'd hold it for you, but they wouldn't sell to me. Some legal complication about adjacent properties. You look." Jack couldn't finish the sentence. "You look exactly the same." "Not possible." "Well, you look well." Thomas laughed. "Clean living and good Wyoming air. You should come for supper tonight. Sarah's been cooking all day when she heard you were arriving. She remembers you fondly." Sarah, Jack's childhood friend, the girl he'd climbed trees with and traded secrets with before his father died and the world fell apart. She'd been 14 when he left at 15. She'd be 29 now. But Jack had seen her that morning in town, and she'd looked 20 at most. "I'd appreciate that," Jack said, because he needed to understand what was happening. "What time?" 6 o'clock. "Same house, you remember the way." Thomas tipped his hat and rode off, sitting his horse with the same easy grace Jack remembered. Jack walked the property in a daze. The creek still ran where it always had. The old oak where he'd carved his initials was bigger but recognizable. Everything about the land made sense. Everything about the Parkers made none. That evening, approaching the Parker house, Jack's confusion deepened. The house looked maintained but old, older than 15 years should account for. Paint faded in patterns that suggested decades, not just the years since he'd left. But the woman who opened the door looked 30 at most, with Sarah Parker's same green eyes and dark hair. "Jack Donnelly," she said, and her smile was genuine. "I can't believe you're back. Come in, come in." Inside, the house was exactly as Jack remembered. Same furniture, same pictures on the walls. Even the same curtains his mother had helped Mrs. Parker sew 20 years ago. But Mrs. Parker, Catherine, looked barely 50. She should be 65 at least. Over supper, Jack studied them all. Thomas, Catherine, and Sarah, talking and laughing like no time had passed. They asked about his cattle drive years, his travels, his plans for the ranch. Normal conversation. But nothing about this was normal. Finally, Jack couldn't hold it in anymore. "Forgive me for being direct, but you all look exactly like I remember. Haven't aged at all." The table went quiet. The Parkers exchanged glances. Then Thomas set down his fork carefully. "I suppose we knew you'd notice. You always were observant, even as a boy." He took a breath. "There's something we need to tell you about who we really are. We're not the Parkers," Thomas said quietly. "Not the ones you knew." Jack felt the room tilt. "What?" Sarah, or the woman he'd thought was Sarah, spoke gently. "The Thomas and Catherine Parker you knew were my grandparents. They died 10 years ago, within months of each other. The Sarah you remember was my mother. She passed 5 years back." Jack's mind struggled to process this. "But you look exactly like them. Sound like them." "I'm Thomas Parker III, the man explained. "Named for my grandfather. This is my wife, Catherine, named for my grandmother at her request. And this is our daughter, Sarah. We're named after them because—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Because your father asked us to be." "My father?" Jack's voice was barely a whisper. Catherine, the younger Catherine, pulled out a letter. The paper was worn, read many times. "Your father wrote this to my husband's grandfather a month before he died. Jack, your father knew he was sick. He knew you'd have to leave, that the ranch would be foreclosed. And he made my husband's grandparents promise something. Jack took the letter with shaking hands. His father's handwriting, familiar and painful. Thomas, I'm asking something strange, but please hear me out. When I'm gone, Jack will have to leave. He's too young to hold the ranch alone, and the bank will take it. He'll go off to make his way, and that's right and proper. But someday he'll come back. I know my boy, he'll come back. And when he does, he'll need to feel like he's coming home. Not to a place where everyone he knew is dead or changed beyond recognition. Your family has always looked similar generation to generation. Would you consider naming your grandchildren after yourselves? Let them live in this house, maintain it like it was? So when Jack returns, whenever that is, he'll find familiar faces and a familiar place? I know it's a strange request, but it would give me peace. Jack read it 3 times. He asked you to pretend to be the same people. Not pretend, Thomas III said. To carry on their names and their place. To be here, so you'd have something familiar to return to. Your father was terrified you'd come back to nothing but ghosts. But why not tell me? Jack's voice cracked. We were going to, Sarah said. Tonight. But you noticed first. She smiled sadly. My grandmother, the original Sarah, she told me stories about you. About how you'd solve puzzles that stumped everyone, how you noticed details others missed. She said if you ever came back, you'd figure it out immediately. Jack looked around the room. At the furniture that was original because they'd kept it, at the pictures that were the same because they'd maintained them. How much of what I remember is real? All of it, Catherine too said. The people you knew were real. Your friendship with the first Sarah was real. Your father's friendship with the first Thomas was real. We've just continued their legacy. This house, this land, this place, we've kept it the same because your father asked us to, because he loved you enough to think 15 years ahead. Jack felt tears burning. His father had died when he was 15, leaving him alone and desperate. He'd thought his father's last months were consumed with pain and fear. But apparently, even dying, his father had been planning for Jack's future, trying to build him a soft place to land whenever he finally came home. The original Parkers, Jack asked quietly. Did they agree to this? They thought your father was brilliant, Thomas III said. They loved the idea of their family being a constant in your life, whenever you returned. My grandfather said it gave meaning to their later years, knowing they were building something that would outlast them. Jack looked at Sarah, this Sarah, who wasn't his childhood friend but shared her name and her smile. Did your grandmother tell you about us? About her and me? Sarah nodded. She said you were the kindest boy she'd ever known. That you once spent 2 weeks carving her a wooden bird because she mentioned she liked cardinals. She kept it until the day she died. I have it now if you'd like to see it. The carefully constructed world Jack had returned to was crumbling, but underneath was something more profound. Evidence that he'd been loved with a depth he'd never imagined. Jack couldn't sleep that night. He walked his property under starlight, trying to reconcile memory with reality. Everything he'd thought he was coming back to was a carefully maintained illusion, but an illusion built from love, not deception. The next morning, Sarah appeared at his door with a wooden box. My grandmother left this for you. Instructions said to give it to you if you ever returned. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Letters the first Sarah had written to him over the years but never sent. Letters tracking her life, her marriage, the birth of her children. Letters asking where he was, if he was safe, if he was happy. The last one was dated 6 months before she died. Dear Jack, wherever you are, I hope you found what you were looking for out there in the world. I hope you found peace. If you ever come back and read this, know that I never forgot you. You were my best friend when friendship meant everything. The girl you knew grew up, lived a full life, had children and grandchildren. But part of her stayed 14 forever, climbing trees with you and believing the world was kinder than it turned out to be. Come home, Jack. It's waiting for you. Jack looked up to find Sarah, the younger Sarah, watching him with understanding. She really loved you. As a friend, I mean. My grandfather wasn't jealous. He understood. I should have written, Jack said hoarsely. I should have let them know where I was. You were a kid who'd lost everything. You did what you needed to survive. She sat beside him on the porch step. My grandmother understood that. She told my mother, who told me, sometimes people have to leave to figure out how to come back. Over the following days, the younger Parkers helped Jack understand the full scope of what his father and their grandparents had arranged. The Parkers had maintained not just their house, but his as well, keeping it from total decay. They'd paid small amounts to the bank over the years to prevent complete seizure of certain family items. They'd kept his mother's garden alive, replanting from saved seeds each spring. Why? Jack asked Thomas III as they walked the property line. Why go to all this trouble for 15 years, not knowing if I'd ever return? Thomas looked at the land stretched before them. Because your father saved my grandfather's life once. Pulled him from a frozen river when they were young men. My grandfather always said he owed your father a debt he could never repay. This was his chance. And honestly, Thomas smiled. It became more than obligation. It became purpose. My grandparents, then my parents, now me and my family, we've been caretakers of possibility. The possibility that good people get second chances. That love persists beyond death. That home means something permanent in a changing world. Jack discovered other things too. The original Thomas Parker had kept detailed records of the ranch's condition, noting repairs needed, tracking which fields were most productive, observing weather patterns. All information the younger Thomas had studied and was ready to share. Your father's ranch can be profitable again, Thomas told him. But you'll need help the first few years. I'd like to propose a partnership. We combine efforts on certain projects, water management, shared equipment, cooperative selling. We help each other like our fathers did. It was exactly what Jack needed but had been too proud to ask for. I don't have much to offer in return right now. You have what matters, Thomas said. You came back. You're rebuilding. That's enough. But that night, examining his father's old papers, Jack found something troubling. A deed transfer dated 2 weeks before his father died. The ranch hadn't just been foreclosed. His father had signed it over to someone. To Thomas Parker. Jack's trust, so newly rebuilt, cracked. Jack confronted Thomas the next morning, deed in hand. You said the bank foreclosed. But my father signed the ranch over to your grandfather 2 weeks before he died. Why did you lie? Thomas's face went pale. I didn't know. My grandfather never. He took the deed, studying it with growing shock. I swear to you, Jack, I never saw this. My grandfather told us the bank took it, that he tried to buy it but couldn't. Then why does this exist? Jack's anger was barely controlled. Catherine appeared, drawn by raised voices. She looked at the deed and gasped. Thomas, your grandfather's lockbox. The one we've never opened. They found it in the attic, a metal box with a letter taped to the top in the original Thomas Parker's handwriting. To be opened only if Jack Donnelly returns. Inside was another letter, and the truth that had been hidden for 15 years. If you're reading this, Jack has come home. Thomas III, you need to know the full story. Jack's father didn't just ask me to maintain the Parker presence for comfort. He signed the ranch over to me to protect it. The bank was going to seize it and sell it to a development company that planned to strip mine the Creek Valley. Your father and I had proof, documents showing the bank president was getting kickbacks from the mining company. But we couldn't prove it in time to stop the foreclosure legally. So Jack's father and I made a plan. He'd sign the ranch to me in a private transfer, making the bank's foreclosure invalid. I would hold it until Jack was old enough and ready to return. Then I'd transfer it back for exactly what Jack's father had paid me, $1. Legal, binding, and protecting the land from destruction. I never told Thomas III or his parents because I worried knowledge of the deed might leak, might bring legal challenges we couldn't afford. The ranch has been Jack's the whole time. He just didn't know it. Enclosed is the counter deed already signed. All it needs is Jack's signature, and the ranch is legally his. Not bought back, never lost. Held in trust by a friend who owed a life debt and was honored to repay it. Jack stared at the papers. The counter deed was there, exactly as described. $1, transferring ownership back to Jack Donnelly. I don't understand, Jack whispered. If the ranch was always mine, why did the bank list it for sale? Thomas III scanned more papers in the box. Because they didn't know about the private transfer. Your father and my grandfather kept it completely secret. When my grandfather died, my father didn't know to contest the bank's claim. They've been trying to sell property they don't actually own. Catherine was crying quietly. Your father and Thomas's grandfather, they protected everything. The land, the water, the future. They knew the mining would destroy the whole valley, poison the creek, ruin every ranch downstream. Jack felt the weight of 15 years' shift. He hadn't been abandoned to lose everything. He'd been protected by 2 men who'd thought decades ahead, who'd valued land and legacy over immediate profit. His father's last act hadn't been leaving him alone. It had been ensuring he'd have something to come back to. There's more, Thomas said, pulling out bank documents. My grandfather collected evidence against the bank president and the mining company. He was waiting for the right time to use it. Jack, with these documents, you could not only secure your ranch but expose corruption that's probably still happening. Jack looked at the evidence: letters, financial records, proof of bribes and illegal dealings. His father and Thomas Parker had been building a case, planning to protect not just one ranch, but the entire valley. We finish what they started, Jack said quietly. We use this evidence to stop anyone from ever threatening these lands again. But first, there was something else he needed to do. He looked at Thomas III. Your grandfather held my ranch for 15 years. That's worth more than $1. The deed says. I know what the deed says. But I'm saying your family deserves partnership. Real partnership. Equal shares in profits, shared decision-making. You've been caretakers. I want you to be co-owners. Taking down a corrupt bank president required strategy. Jack and Thomas brought the evidence to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne, a man named Morrison with a reputation for honesty that even criminals respected. Morrison studied the documents for 2 hours without speaking. Finally, this is 15 years old. The bank president from back then, Harold Wickham, he's still in charge. Still making similar deals, from what I hear. But proving current corruption is different from proving past corruption. What if the pattern still exists? Jack asked. What if he's still taking bribes from mining companies? Morrison leaned back. Then we'd need current evidence. These old documents prove intent and history. But for charges that would stick, we need something fresh. The younger Thomas had an idea. The bank tried to sell Jack's ranch 3 months ago. Listed it publicly. If they're selling property they don't legally own, that's fraud happening right now. Morrison's eyes sharpened. That's actionable. And if we can show it's part of a pattern, that Wickham is still working with mining interests to seize properties. He looked at Jack. Are you willing to risk everything by challenging the bank publicly? They'll fight back hard. Jack thought about his father's last months, spent protecting land instead of just grieving. My father risked everything to stop them. I can do the same. The investigation took 3 weeks. Morrison was thorough, tracing current bank dealings, interviewing other ranchers who'd lost property. A pattern emerged. Wickham was still working the same scheme, partnering with mining companies to seize land rich in minerals, then selling to developers while taking hidden payments. But Wickham had powerful friends. When Morrison filed charges, political pressure came immediately. The territorial governor received letters questioning Morrison's judgment. Newspapers ran articles suggesting Morrison was harassing legitimate business. Then Sarah, the younger Sarah, did something unexpected. She visited every ranch family who'd lost property to Wickham's schemes over the past 15 years. She collected their stories, their documentation, their pain. She wrote articles for newspapers in Denver and Salt Lake City, bypassing Wyoming's compromised press. The truth about land theft in Wyoming territory ran in 6 major newspapers. Sarah's writing was clear, factual, devastating. She named names, cited documents, told human stories of families destroyed by corruption. The article ended with a challenge. If Harold Wickham is innocent, let him prove it in open court. Let him explain why the bank sells property it doesn't own. Let him account for payments from mining companies that coincidentally match seized property values. The public response was immediate. Other victims came forward. Federal investigators arrived from Washington. Wickham's political protection crumbled as newspapers across the country picked up the story. Jack found Sarah in the Parker house, exhausted from days of writing and traveling. You didn't have to do this. This wasn't your fight. Yes, it was, she said firmly. My grandmother told me stories about your father, how he believed some things mattered more than personal safety, how he taught her that staying silent about wrong was the same as participating in it. I've been thinking about what it means to carry someone's name. It's not just about looking like them or living in their house. It's about honoring what they stood for. Jack understood. The younger Parkers weren't just maintaining a physical legacy. They were carrying forward values, principles, the kind of courage that defined who the original Parkers had been. The trial was public, contentious, and ultimately successful. Wickham was convicted of fraud, bribery, and illegal seizure. The bank was placed under federal oversight, and every family whose land had been stolen received legal recourse to reclaim it. Jack's ranch was formally and legally confirmed as his property. But more than that, the whole valley was protected. New laws prevented the kind of corruption that had threatened everything his father loved. Standing on his porch the day the verdict came through, Jack watched the sun set over land that was truly, finally, permanently his. Thomas joined him, and they stood in companionable silence. "Your grandfather and my father," Jack said eventually. "They saved more than a ranch. They saved a whole way of life." "They gave us a foundation," Thomas replied. "Now we build on it." With legal battles behind them, Jack and Thomas began the real work, making the ranch profitable again. They implemented the original Thomas Parker's notes, combining them with techniques Jack had learned on cattle drives. The partnership was natural, built on mutual respect and complementary skills. But Jack struggled with something deeper. For 15 years, he defined himself by loss, orphaned, dispossessed, alone. Now he had to redefine himself by what he'd gained. It was harder than expected. Sarah noticed first. She found him one evening sitting by the creek, staring at water. "You look like someone who doesn't know where he belongs," she observed. Jack smiled ruefully. "I spent 15 years wanting to come home. Now I'm here, and I don't know how to be here. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." She sat beside him. "You've been a cowboy, a drifter, someone with no ties. Now you're a landowner, a partner, someone people depend on. That's a different identity." "I keep waiting for it to be taken away," Jack admitted. "Like I don't deserve it. My grandmother wrote something in her last letter to you. Did you read all the way to the end?" Jack shook his head. The letters had been overwhelming. Sarah pulled a folded paper from her pocket. She'd been carrying it, waiting for this moment. She wrote, "Jack, when you come home, you'll think you're returning to the boy you were. But you can't go back to being 14. You have to figure out who you are at whatever age you return. That's harder than just returning. But the land doesn't care how old you are or where you've been. It just needs someone to care for it. Be that person. That's enough." Jack felt tears threaten. She was wise. She had a lot of time to think about it. 60 years on this land, watching seasons cycle, watching people come and go. She learned that belonging isn't about deserving. It's about showing up and doing the work. Over the following months, Jack did exactly that. He showed up. He did the work. He planted crops using the original Thomas Parker's rotation notes. He repaired fences with the younger Thomas's help. He learned from his failures and built on his successes. The Parkers became true family, not replacements for what he'd lost, but something new and equally valuable. Catherine taught him her grandmother's recipes. Thomas showed him water management techniques passed down through generations. Sarah helped him understand the valley's social dynamics, who could be trusted, who needed watching. One evening, Thomas brought up something difficult. "Jack, I need to tell you something. When my grandfather held your ranch in trust, he made improvements. A new well, reinforced the barn, planted windbreaks. He paid for all that himself. According to the deed, those improvements belong to you now. But I've calculated what they'd be worth, adjusted for 15 years. It's significant money." Jack understood what Thomas was saying. Legally, ethically, there was a debt. "How much?" Jack asked. Thomas named a figure that represented years of investment. "Then we handle it the same way our fathers did," Jack said. "Not as debt, but as partnership. Those improvements made the ranch more valuable. You share in that value. We formalized the co-ownership I offered. Legal and binding. You don't have to. I want to. Your family has been stewards of this place when I couldn't be. That deserves recognition, not just gratitude." They drew up papers making the ranch officially shared property. 2 families, 1 land, permanent partnership. But there was still one thing unresolved. Jack asked Sarah to walk with him one afternoon to a spot by the creek where an old oak grew. "Your grandmother and I carved our initials here when we were kids," Jack said, finding the faded marks. "JD and SB in a heart. Kid stuff." "Not kid stuff," Sarah said gently. "Friend stuff. Important stuff. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Does it bother you, all of this? Carrying her name, hearing about her, living in her shadow?" Sarah thought carefully. "At first, yes. I felt like I was performing someone else's life. But I've realized I'm not replacing her. I'm continuing something she started. There's freedom in that." 2 years after Jack's return, the ranch was thriving. The partnership with the Parkers had proven more successful than either family could have achieved alone. They'd expanded carefully, hired 2 hands, built new structures. The land that had nearly been destroyed by mining now supported 2 families and provided jobs for others. But Jack had been thinking about something since finding his father's letter. He'd tracked down his father's other friends. Men who'd worked with him, known him, could tell stories Jack had never heard. He'd learned his father wasn't just a rancher but a quiet activist, someone who'd stood up against corruption long before the final fight that saved Jack's inheritance. He was always taking on causes nobody else would touch, one old rancher told Jack. Defending people who'd been cheated, standing up to powerful men. That's probably what got him sick, the stress of fighting all the time. But he never stopped. Said if good people didn't stand up, evil people would just keep winning. Jack realized his father had given him more than land. He'd given him an example of what it meant to live with purpose. One evening, Jack gathered both families, his Parker partners and the two ranch hands who'd become like brothers. I've been thinking about what we're building here. It's more than a profitable ranch. We've created something that proves cooperation works better than competition. I want to formalize that. Create a model other ranchers can follow. Shared resources, mutual support, protection against the kind of corruption that nearly destroyed this valley. Thomas smiled. You're describing a cooperative. I'm describing what my father and your grandfather started. They showed me that you can't just take care of yourself. You have to take care of the whole system you're part of. They spent months developing the structure. The Parker Donnelly Cooperative became a model for the region. Shared equipment, collective bargaining for supplies, mutual aid during hardship, and legal protection against predatory business practices. Within a year, 12 ranches had joined. Within 3, it was 30. Sarah documented everything, writing articles that spread the model across Wyoming and beyond. She discovered her own gift, not just carrying her grandmother's name, but building on her legacy in ways uniquely her own. One spring morning, Jack stood at the same fence line where he'd first returned. The land looked different now, well-tended, prosperous, alive with purpose. He thought about the journey from 15-year-old orphan to 30-year-old landowner, from solitary drifter to community builder. The younger Sarah found him there. Over 2 years, their friendship had deepened into something neither wanted to name too quickly. But it was there, growing like everything else on this land. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how my father's last act was making sure I'd have a home to return to. And how your grandparents' last act was the same, creating continuity, so I wouldn't come back to nothing but ghosts." Jack looked at her. "I spent 15 years being angry at my father for dying, for leaving me alone. But he never left me alone. He just gave me time to grow up before I inherited everything he'd built. And now you're building on it," Sarah said. "That's how it works. Each generation adds to what came before." Jack pulled out something he'd been carrying, the wooden cardinal he'd carved for the original Sarah when they were children. Her granddaughter had given it back to him months ago. "Your grandmother kept this for over 40 years. It meant enough to matter." He handed it to Sarah. "I want you to have it. Not because you're replacing her, but because you're adding your own chapter to this story." Sarah took the carving, tears in her eyes. "Jack Donnelly, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I came back here thinking I was reclaiming the past. But what I found was a future. And I'd like you to be part of it. If you're willing." She kissed him, simple and direct. "I've been willing since you first noticed we hadn't aged. Since you looked at the impossible and decided to understand it instead of running from it." That summer, they married in the same house where both their families had gathered for generations. The original Thomas and Catherine Parker would have been proud to see their granddaughter marry Jack Donnelly. His father would have been proud to see his son finally, completely home. The ranch continued to prosper. The cooperative grew. And 2 families whose names had been preserved across generations created a new generation, continuing the cycle of land, legacy, and love that defined what it meant to truly belong somewhere. Jack never stopped being grateful for the mystery that brought him home. Neighbors who seemed not to age, who turned out to be guardians of something more precious than he'd imagined. They'd protected not just property but possibility. The possibility that running away and coming home weren't opposites, but parts of the same journey. The possibility that family could be both blood and choice. The possibility that the best way to honor the past was to build a future worthy of it. And on quiet evenings, walking land he now knew every inch of, Jack would think about his father's words from that long-ago letter. "He'll come back. I know my boy, he'll come back." His father had known him better than Jack had known himself. Had faith when Jack had none. Had built a foundation strong enough to wait 15 years for someone to return and build upon it. That was love. That was legacy. That was home.